Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a cloud solutions architect specializing in management technologies. Today's discussion is the second installment in our series focused on the Intune suite. Today's topic will be endpoint privilege management. Now, I've done a session on endpoint privilege management, kind of standalone, even recorded it back in the day. Didn't really weave it part of the Intune suite, but it is an integral component of the Intune suite. And so I want to rehash it here. It's a good idea to update the content based on some small changes, right, that have happened, but to take another look at it through the lens and include it in the overall discussion of the Intune suite. So typical agenda, what is it? Why do we care about it? We'll kind of look at the requirements and see how it works and watch it in action and so forth as we go through. Some pretty important things to talk about in the troubleshooting tips and tricks section as we get there. All right, so, okay. First of all, what is endpoint privilege management? Well, put simply, endpoint privilege management is a component that allows organizations to more strictly adhere to the idea of principle of least privilege, right? To be able to take a user that is a standard user and elevate their privileges to admin for certain specific tasks. Another way to say that is it's not uncommon, perhaps, that IT folks or others, help desk or whoever, right, in an organization may be granted higher level of rights than they truly would need if there was something like endpoint privilege management at play, right? There may be some few things that individuals need to be able to do, maybe a few tools they need to be able to run, or software installs and uninstalls they need to be able to do, or whatever that task is that typically requires higher than standard user rights. So endpoint privilege management will allow IT to define what those tasks are and to grant those privileges without granting broad privileges to everything else that might come along with a certain set of permissions that you would otherwise assign, right? That's what endpoint privilege management is. Really pretty cool. I think you'll agree when you see it, right? So why do we care? Well, as we are all in this zero trust journey where we're reimagining IT and we no longer have the boundaries of our local area network and some of the authentication approaches that we've had historically, and we're in this cloud-based world where workers can work from anywhere and whatever, right? This is just another cog in the wheel toward helping you on that zero trust journey, right? Absolutely, endpoint privilege management supports this by really helping you take your broad user base and hone what they do, right? Granular controls, you're going to see that we can build basically a set of what are called settings and rules that will govern how endpoint privilege management works in your enterprise. And it can be a different approach depending on users and groups and whatever needs you have and device types and whatever, right? So very important there. And then as you're doing all this, having a robust way to report on the endpoint privilege management actions and so forth is really important. And we do have some really nice reporting that you will see in a moment. Always keep in mind that you're going to see a very simple approach in my demo in my lab that is nowhere near as complex as what you will find in production environments anywhere, right? But you'll get the idea. So what are the requirements of endpoint privilege management? Well, so we've already mentioned that, of course, having Intune, but not just Intune, having Intune suite licensing is important, right? To be able to have access to the endpoint privilege management capability, right? Not a licensing guru. There could be some Intune licensing plans where you might be able to acquire just endpoint privilege management. Not sure that's true for some of these Intune suite components, but definitely an extra level of licensing that's needed to be able to access endpoint privilege management. Here are the supported operating systems where endpoint privilege management will work. When I originally recorded this, the list of supported operating systems was slightly different. So this is, updated. And the question is, will endpoint privilege management work outside of these operating systems? Not fully, right? Be careful. If you have one, you can certainly try it. I mean, it's fun to try that in a test environment, but likely you will find that there are certain things that don't work that you need as part of this, right, to be a whole solution. One thing that was added is there's actually a frequently asked question you'll see at the end of this about, hey, I've got a virtual machine. Why doesn't endpoint privilege management work? And the answer is likely because you're working on an AVD, right? Which that's not supported. W365 PC is, and that was added, I believe, since I recorded this the first time. A workplace join machine is absolutely not supported for endpoint privilege management. And then this one, really critical. SSL inspection of network traffic is not supported in any way, shape, or form with endpoint privilege management. And lastly, you do need to either be hybrid Azure AD joined, intra these days, or pure intra ID joined to be able to work with endpoint privilege management. So as we start to get toward our demo of endpoint privilege management, let's think about some scenarios, and these are three, right, that come to mind. Definitely not the only ones, but if you have users, maybe there's someone in a department that has the responsibility for, kind of helping peers or whatever, and they want to be able to do application installs, uninstalls, and they're a trusted resource or whatever, then you can grant them that right, to be able to do those kinds of things. If same kind of scenario, there's driver updates that need to be applied, you can grant that right. I mean, heck, you could grant that right temporarily to a user if you wanted to get things done, right? Whatever. If there's certain Windows diagnostics tools that need to be run in an environment to collect data or whatever, then that's maybe an option. And you can fill in the blank for any other scenarios that might be applicable to you. So how does all of this work? And this is an incredibly simplified diagram on purpose, right? Just to illustrate one concept. So typically, whenever we think of an Intune enrolled device, we think of managing it via MDM. And that is absolutely true for the vast majority of things that we manage on that device, right? Currently and certainly historically. There's also a component called Intune Management Extension that adds or that works in some scenarios where the capabilities of management are just not available through MDM. Things like running Win32 app installs, running PowerShell scripts, the device query capability that's out there now. Those are driven through the Intune Management Extension, totally separate component, really seamless for you as you administer these devices, but it's out there. There's this new module, not really new so much as of this recording, it's been around for a while, called MMPC. I don't know what that stands for. I can guess, right? It's either I've never heard it or I'm forgetting it. Either way, right? But MMPC. And so I'm going to make a really crude, probably not factual analogy, but it's the closest one that I can think of to describe this, right? MMPC is an updated module that is used to facilitate some more rapid, higher speed kind of interaction between the device, managed device, and Intune. I think of it as kind of similar to the high-speed notification channel in Config Manager. Again, that's a terrible analogy. It really probably doesn't hold up, but that's what sticks in my mind. So for whatever use it is to you. And then MMPC historically is this component that gets added whenever you do enable endpoint privilege management. In today's world, MMPC component can be added several different ways, right? Enough about that, right? But you will see it starting to be out there on your device. If you look, if you know where to look, if you care to, right, you'll see that it's out there. Again, it will be seamless for Intune administrators. You don't even need to worry about it being there. And its role will probably increase as time goes on. Don't know, we'll see, right? But it is a component out there, as well. And endpoint privilege management works through MMPC specifically, right? in combination, but definitely works through MMPC. Okay. All of that said, let's get into the portal and talk about configuring this thing. So let's pop into to Intune here. There's Intune, and take a look at how to do. All right. So in the Intune portal, we will move over to Endpoint Security, and under Endpoint Security, we will have Endpoint Privilege Management as soon as this updates. Endpoint Privilege Management, right? Okay. So we have several nodes here that we can talk about. I'll kind of talk about them in reverse order. Well, I'll start with reports, since reports is the first node, right? We have several different reports that we can access here to see the status of our elevations, how they're working in various scenarios. Here's just an elevation report, managed elevation. Now, there are two different types of elevation that you will see in just a moment. One is something called automatic elevation, right? Where you configure a certain app or a certain target that you want whenever a given user clicks on it to have that automatically be elevated, right? Not something we recommend for widespread use. There could be some scenarios where that makes sense, so it's really up to you. The other type is a managed elevation, where the user might need to interact, request permission, whatever. You'll see that whenever I do the demo in a moment, right? And one thing is, as I do this, bear in mind, right? I'm going to give you examples of how to make this work. But in a production environment, very likely, you're going to have various combinations of settings and actions and so on that will be applicable to certain users, certain devices, certain scenarios, whatever. And all of that is fine, right? So when you see me set a setting or combination of settings, know that you can have that different for different conditions you need to account for. It's just a matter of configuring it that way, right? That's probably inferred, but I just want to make sure it is. And so other elevation reports here by applications or users or whatever, right? So plenty of reporting here. I'll just run this elevation report. It'll probably be boring because I don't have much going on. I do have myself asking for elevation for different things over and over again. So you kind of can see that, right? And then managed elevation report. I have a couple where I'm doing that. Here's an automatic user confirmed, whatever's going on there, etc. Right? So you can dig into those. There's also elevation requests. So I don't have any that are here pending, right? What's going on? But you do see that I have ones that I've done historically. And then there's this section here. So backing into where we're going, policy. There's this section here that you will see in certain areas of Intune, certain components of Intune called reusable settings. Put simply, reusable settings is the ability to define something one time that you need to use multiple times, right? So if there's a setting that instead of having to click through it and set it every single time when you go make a configuration, you just want to define it one time and be able to reuse it, that's the name, right? That's what we can do here. And so this won't totally make sense to you yet because you've not seen the policies that's coming up. But the one thing you can do here is add a certificate. So a certificate can be used to vouch for the integrity of a file here in a minute, which you'll see, right? But you can use a certificate file and just keep reusing that if you would like to in policies, right? So policies is where we really get into the meat of this, right? There are two broad types of policies. One is a settings policy. Settings policy is leveraged to define whether endpoint privilege management is turned on, turned off, some configuration basically, and so forth, right? So the idea, I would think in most environments, is that you will have just a handful maybe of settings policies, but then the other type of policy called a rules policy, you will probably have a lot of, depending on how how much you're using this, where you're using it, whatever. And so the settings policy defines the endpoint privilege management settings, and then the rules policy will define the rule about a given type of elevation that you want to do or account for or whatever. So in this case, I've used the command prompt. You'll see that in just a minute. I'll explain why I use the command prompt. But let's go look at, here's my settings policy. Let's go look at creating this policy and what it would look like and so forth. So I'm going to create a settings policy real quick. And you're going to see that I have just, here, give it a name, just a couple of settings here. First, whether I want to enable endpoint privilege management or not, right? So I mentioned we have MMPC and that we are able to achieve some high rates of speed for configuration delivery with MMPC. I recall wondering if you define an MMP or an endpoint privilege management setting, how quickly does it get to a device? Now, I've not timed it, but in some discussions, I was chatting with some colleagues about it as well, and basically, with whenever you set this up, right, you can target EPM policy to either a user or a device. And so my mind was thinking, okay, what happens if we target a user? How quickly will an EPM policy get to that user after they sign in? The answer is so fast that they can't hardly even pay attention to it, right? It goes down very, very quickly based on the context of the user that signs in and whatever else. Now, having said that, so we clearly support deploying EPM policy to users. Having said that, we do urge to target devices, right? Devices are preferred for targeting, just a little bit more consistent. There's not so much flux with users signing in and out, right? So imagine a system where it's targeted to users. User 1 is enabled for EPM, user 2 is not enabled, user 3 is. So user 1 signs in and all the churn goes on in the background very quickly to enable EPM for the user 1 session. User 1 signs out, user 2 comes, and oh, EPM's not enabled, so there's a whole lot of churn has to go on in the background to turn off EPM for that session. And then user 3 comes in who is enabled and more churn. That works, right? It absolutely works, is supported. But if you instead target your EPM policies to the device, then you don't have the churn associated with mobile or multiple user logins and logouts and so forth and so on. And you can ultimately make that decision, but device targeting is recommended. So once we enable endpoint privilege management here, we have a few decisions to make. What is our default elevation response? So by default, if a user asks to elevate a given application, what are we going to do? Deny? Require user confirmation? Require support approval? Or just don't configure anything? So think of this as if you don't have a rule associated with something specifically, what kind of foundation do you want to lay for elevation in your organization, just as a result of turning on EPM, right? Allow elevation detection, yes or no, right? If you want to do that. And do you want to send elevation data for reporting? Most likely you will. Maybe you don't for whatever reason. So you have the choice, yes or no. But then if you do want to send data in for reporting, what kind of data do you want to actually send in? So this is laying the foundation for enabling, disabling, doing whatever you want to do with EPM on a managed device, right? So just a handful of these probably in your environment, and you'll be good. The other type is actually a rule to elevate something, right? So I've chosen command prompt. You'll see this in just a moment. Why did I choose command prompt? Because if you allow a user to elevate their permissions and open the command prompt as administrator, then think about all of the things that a user could do, right? If they're an administrator in command prompt anything they launch from command prompt could be as an administrator. So the sky's the limit, right? Initially, whenever we introduced EPM, there was no control over that. Very, very quickly after that, there became a control, right, where you can govern how child processes actually are spawned and what permissions level they have. I'll show you that. The reason I call it out is when you're defining something for elevation, think through all of the ways they could use that thing to do other actions, right? And then define your rules accordingly to control for that eventuality. I mean, if they have admin rights to a certain file type, and they can't do anything from that file type that would do any kind of other child processes, cool. Make a decision that way. But if there are options to launch child processes from something you're elevating, definitely factor that in. And as I'm saying that, just want to talk through. You might wonder what kind of file types are supported for elevation. So may change in the future. Right now, it's EXEs, MSIs, and PowerShell scripts are supported for elevation, right? Okay, so let's go look at creating a rules policy. Okay, here's the rules policy. And so, again, pretty easy to define. I'll show you the one I created, but just some options, right? So, first thing is, what is the file? Right? What's the rule name, description if you want it, and then what is the elevation type? So user confirmed, support approved, or automatic. So those are your options, right? So I'll just say user confirmed. Validation, how do I want to validate? Well, I can choose business justification, Windows authentication, either one, both together, whatever, right? So I've chosen both in my little demo so that I can get the pop-up and have to put in the justification. And then here's what I was talking about. Child process behavior. What do I want to do here? Do I want to allow all child processes to run elevated? Be very careful with that, right? Be very aware of what can be done. Do I want to require a rule for that thing to be able to be elevated? So imagine that I launch the command prompt and then I want to initiate a software install or call a diagnostics tool from the command prompt, whatever, right? Those are child processes. And so if I don't have a rule for that child process, then by this configuration, it will be denied. Or do I just want to blanket deny every single child process? That might be a good idea in some conditions, so you have that option. So this is defining how things will work in endpoint privilege management. Here's defining what you're going to put that policy on top of, right? So here's where you'll specify your file name. You can optionally specify your file path. Now, be careful here because there are some files that may exist in multiple locations. And so if you fail to add the file path, that's fine. We don't force you to, but it's possible then that we would detect the wrong instance of the file whenever someone chooses it, right? So adding the file path just gives more specificity. And then what is your signature source, right? So I might have a certificate that I want to use to kind of validate the file and confirm the file that I'm trying to define here. And you see that use a certificate file in reusable settings. So if I have a cert that I want to use multiple times or a couple, right? I define them once in reusable settings that I showed you, and then just select them here, and then off you go, right? No problem. Or if you wanted to upload a cert file here, you can. Notice the UI changes, right? Or maybe I don't have a cert file. I didn't for my test or my demo, and so I just put not configured. If you put not configured, then you have to supply a file hash, right? Let me back out of this and show you my demo. So get rid of this. And here's mine configuration. And so down to the configuration settings, and here we go, and edit. And so you'll see that I have the command prompt defined. Here's my path, not configured, and I have given file hash. Now, how do I get file hash? Well, in PowerShell, there is a get-file hash commandlet, and you can point it against whatever file you're trying to define. It will give you the hash. Now, be careful, though, because depending on version differences or whatever, right, that file hash may and likely will be different. Even when I was setting up and coming back to this demo, the file hash I had used previously was different because now the test devices I'm using are a different version of Windows. And so you may need to have multiple rules here to accommodate all of the different versions of a file that could be out there depending, right? May not be, depends on the file. So take that into account as well when you determine how are you going to validate the file. Will it be a hash? Will it be a cert? Whatever. You can define a minimum version, and then whatever else is, this is even optional. These are optional, right? And so you can go. So this is configured and deployed to my devices, right? So we are good to go. So let's minimize this and go take a look at Endpoint Privilege Management actually running on a. So to do that, I'm going to pull in a virtual machine, and here it is. And it's pretty straightforward, right? I have an elevation rule for my command prompt. So I'm going to type in CMD, and whenever I did this initially and went up here and right-clicked, I thought, where is my entry that would allow me to elevate this? And it's not here, right? So, but if I dig deeper and right-click on this shortcut, you'll see there is an option, run with elevated access. So I'll review this again when we get to the wrap-up, right? But right now, there are some right-click menus where you're not going to see the run with elevated access option. We're working to make that not the case so that you will see it across, right? And so that's that. I don't know when that will show up, but it's something that's in our frequently asked questions you'll see, or our deployment tips, or wherever the heck it is. And so that is something that the product group's aware of, and we're trying to get fixed. But if you go to the right context menu and click Run with Elevated Access, then in my case, because of the way it's configured, I need to ask for permission and provide a reason why, right? So here it's just, I'll just say demo, right? And continue. And in my case, because I've got a strange, corrupt entry here, if I were to click on this one, it would fail. But I'm going to enter that same information under Use a Different Account, and it will succeed. Okay, good enough. If I typed all of this right, we should be good. So off we go. It's checking my identity in the background, and there we go. So the command prompt is up and running as an administrator. Now this, pulling back the curtains a little bit, this is kind of silly in a way because I'm already an administrator on my device, but I want to demonstrate it to you. So I would maybe launch a child process here that is requires admin privileges and hope to see it fail. In my case, it would not fail because I'm an admin on my device, right? So there is that caveat. I probably should have done it as a standard user, but you get the idea of how this works. And then you can do anything you want to in this command prompt as a full, admin. And then whatever your child policy is, assuming you're a standard user, whatever your child policy is, will be adhered to. If you try to launch something out of the command prompt that doesn't have rules depending on how it's configured, then it won't be allowed to be done, right? So pretty darn easy example of how this works, but extrapolate that across all of the things that you might need to manage, control, kind of launch permissions for, and the value of this tool becomes becomes clear. And again, notice that this is a shortcut to the command prompt. And so the option is even on the shortcut menu pointing at that command prompt. So pretty straightforward, right? And that's really it in terms of demonstrating this. I do want to wrap up with some ideas about troubleshooting. And to do that, I'll go back into the VM to be able to show you, right? So we do have a particular folder where the endpoint privilege management agent lives. So let's go to my PC, look at my C drive. All right, and then under program files, I will have endpoint or EPM agent. Where is it? Oh, there we go. A Microsoft EPM agent. And so what's valuable here is all of this, but this folder. So imagine we have logs with EPM, which is awesome, right? And you can go read these. I'm not going to get into detail about them. You see, we have historical logs and so forth. Like lots of fun information that you can go scour for whether your process completed, didn't complete, blah blah blah. And if you're a config manager admin, that probably makes you very happy to have a log that you can look at because we're very accustomed to logs. Okay, sorry, I'm just deleting all these. Cool. So there's that we can look at. There's also EPM exists in the registry. So you can go there to confirm various configurations about it. And this, oh good, it's already here. So here is my EPM agent. Here's the path where you can find it. And under here, you can see all sorts of interesting detail. Like here's driver information, can't get to it apparently. Here's my EPM service detail. Here are policies that I have deployed. So client policies, elevation rules. So I can see client policies that I've deployed out, right? And validate whether they're there or not or whatever. Here's my one elevation rule for my command prompt and so forth that I can look at and get into. Now, there's some things you'll need to understand to be able to really get into this, but still, you can kind of dig in there and see. Okay, and then just some tips and tricks as we start to wind up the session. Thinking about running with elevated access, I showed it to you in the demo. That is triggered from the right-click menu. Not every right-click menu right now. We are working to close that gap. And so for now, just know that you'll have to maybe go from one menu to another to find it for a given executable. Should be pretty easy to find, just like I did, but be aware. Talked about the file elevation and file types. So the automatic elevation that we don't recommend in general. And then the controlled elevation, talked about the child process controls, where if a file that you're elevating does give you the ability to launch child processes, be aware of that and make sure that you are controlling that appropriately. Client-side components. So this is what I was alluding to a little bit ago, right? So as you make different changes on the device, enable EPM, disable EPM, whatever, right? In order to use endpoint privilege management, there has to be a small set of components provisioned onto the device that will receive elevation policy, enforce them, whatever. And so when you enable endpoint privilege management, then we will provision those components on the device. When you disable it, we will deprovision those from the device. So that's what I'm talking about, if you have the ability to target this to devices, very much preferred, because we don't have the potential churn of deploying EPM and deallocating EPM based on users that sign in and out of the device, right? Doing so just, it works, but it causes a bit of churn. That's covered in the disabling and deprovisioning topic right down there below. And if you want to see more detail about each one of these, we do document these different items along with endpoint privilege management documentation. Talked about managed versus unmanaged elevations and what that means, right? Okay, role-based access controls. Absolutely, we have RBAC controls that will cover some things you might want to decide on endpoint privilege management when you're setting it up. Also, sorry, going back because I forgot to mention one thing, managed versus unmanaged elevations. So you can think of it kind of as two umbrellas. A managed elevation would be an elevation that is handled by endpoint privilege management, whether, whatever type of elevation, whether it's an automatic elevation or an elevation requiring user approval like you saw in the demo, whatever, that's all endpoint privilege management. There is the ability to use run as administrator, right? So if you're logged in as an administrator and you click run as administrator, whatever, that's basically an unmanaged elevation. It's a legacy kind of way, a non-EPM way of doing the same kind of elevation, right? But there, it's without EPM at all, right? Okay, then we have RBAC, and then we talked about the menu options and the right click currently not being on all menus, right? So some redundancy there. In terms of frequently maybe thought of challenges during deployment. So there are, just to run through these, there are some scenarios. Documentation doesn't define what those are, but there are some scenarios where in Windows 10, the notification for support approvals, right, won't make it through. And we're working to close that gap. Maybe, I don't know where we are along that journey. Documentation still reflects this as a deployment consideration. So just be aware, if you're working with Windows 10, run into an oddball scenario, it may be a challenge that we're trying to close the gap on right now, right? So forth. App control for business. So if you have app control for business and you have not made accommodation in the configuration of app control for business for endpoint privilege management, then you may run into challenges. And so be aware of that and make any kind of needed changes in app control for business to make sure that you don't have any disruption. So interactive sign-in. Endpoint privilege management, if you've disabled the ability to do an interactive sign-in in your environment, that very likely will impact endpoint privilege management. We do kind of an interactive sign-in on the back end, substituting for the current user to do what endpoint privilege management does. And so if that's blocked, then endpoint privilege management is going to have challenges. Primary user. So currently, in order to use endpoint privilege management, the primary user on the device is the only one that can do it, right? Again, working to close that, make that different, but as of today, that's the way it is. We talked about rules and file names, right? So if you have the same file name in multiple locations, different versions on a machine, maybe you had a software piece that installed and then a new version came out and it went to a different directory and didn't fully clean up, or whatever reason, right? We've all seen it where you have multiple versions of a file on a device and so forth. Just make sure that you are crafting your rules to focus on the device types, the file names or the files that you care about. Conflicting elevation settings. So this could be one where basically there's some churn going on. So maybe if you have in the settings profile, for example, the default elevation behavior is set to a certain thing and then it's changed multiple times in quick succession, it could very likely result in a challenge, maybe falling back to the default behavior or a conflict or whatever. And so, in any situation, changing settings multiple times in very quick succession can lead to probably confusion. And that's, no doubt here as well. So if you're making changes, just be aware of those changes and do it in a controlled way, and it should all be good, right? Block file download. So Behavior exists in Windows to set an attribute on files that are downloaded directly from the internet and prevent them from executing until validated. Windows has functionality to validate the reputation of files downloaded from the internet. When a file's reputation isn't validated, it may fail to elevate. So if you have that situation and a file is downloaded, it hasn't gone through the process yet to be a validated file, then it could impact elevation attempts, right? Workplace joined devices absolutely are not supported. And then network files, so things on network shares and so forth, may not respond the way that you would think they would to elevation attempts, right? So no support for that right now for map drives and so forth, not supported. So that's really it, folks. Keep your eye toward endpoint privilege management. There should be some updates coming. Oh, here's the frequently asked questions. Still, there should be some updates coming to cover some of the things I mentioned as deficits currently, but still very useful, very powerful tool. Frequently asked questions real quick. Why is my virtual device not onboarding? You saw me actually doing a demo on a virtual device, so clearly it does work with virtual devices. So very likely, if you're seeing a challenge with a virtual machine, it's because it's an unsupported VM like AVD right now as your virtual desktop, right? What happens when a person that already has administrative rights uses a device enabled with endpoint privilege management? So you saw me do that, right? So if that's the case, then endpoint privilege management just doesn't really deal with the elevation request directly like that, right? There's instances where I, as an administrator, through that child process, will be able to launch a file, and through endpoint privilege management, it wouldn't work. But you did see kind of how endpoint privilege management will do its thing, even though I was logged on as an admin, so you can get the idea, right? So what files can be elevated to administrator? We talked about that. Currently, we support exes, MSIs, and PowerShell. And then why doesn't run with elevated show on certain menus? We've already talked about that as well. And then finally, can you launch multiple files with elevated rights at the same time? And the answer is no. It's only one at a time that you can launch with elevated access permissions. And so now, as we do that, we'll wrap this session up. Keep an eye toward endpoint privilege management. Definitely test it out, kick the tires, and we will see you next time.